mental health, particularly from psychosis, in some cultures than they do in others. And the recovery rates from schizophrenia in the so-called developing world are much better than they are in the Western world. And it's quite simple. Why? Because there's, it's all to do with, the support that they're getting from their social network. But also in terms of the fact...
Could it not also be the drug culture?
Sorry?
Could it not also be...
Yeah, there are different variables, yes, of course. Not as simple.
I totally agree with
Yeah, no, but it's not as... Yes,
I
of
think
course, yeah.
drugs
But the point of it is that in terms of the people not listening, I said this a couple of years ago to a group of psychiatrists, and they said, well, they've got a different type of schizophrenia. So you bloody give up. So not everybody listens to because it's not, we're not doing it, sort of, attitude. But anyway, we have found that despite that people do benefit for seeing what is going on elsewhere, and particularly if they have the opportunity to go and see it themselves. Of course, that's not always possible. And it doesn't mean going always abroad. There are good, very good things in this country. But some of the things that we have found to support what we're trying to do in this whole life whole system, approach, are some of these things, Paul. And you want to mention some of them?
Briefly, we want to mention we've got enough time, so please stop me, Kath, and you can make time for the next session, because that's the important session. But just to reflect on what we've been talking about so far, but this is you'll be, I think, very familiar with this kind of idea, is that a healthy community is based on these foundations, and it's about, how, it's about looking at individual and community together, and one doesn't go without the other. So yes, you do need personal development and support.
Is that a fire alarm?
Sounds like a phone.
Or is it somebody in the door?
That's going to sound really great with the
You carry on.
Okay. So I think this is kind of like, if you look at that, you can see it's very much again reflects the kind of conversations we've been having already. That in a sense, you can't separate emotional health from physical, and so it's all part of the whole. And increasingly people are recognising you don't separate out these things, but you need to look at the whole person in the context of their life, the community they live within, the family network. And for instance, I know a lot of new ways of working try to address those very agendas, and they've been very effective in trying to move away from the kind of pathologisation of human distress and name it for what it is. That something happened, you're dealing with it, you may be not dealing with it. How do you move forward in your life? And that's essentially what we were here to do, really. And that can be very contextual, and it's no mistake. For instance, we talked about schizophrenia in this country. If you're from an African Caribbean community, particularly if you're young, you're 8 or 9 times likely to get the diagnosis of schizophrenia. But that's not happening back in Jamaica. They've got the same levels as we've got, if not lower. So there's a whole issue. How can that be? What kind of disease is this that can do that? But in terms of issues that face young men from this community, there are reasons why they may end up having episodes which we would call psychotic, and may lead them to use services. So it's very nuanced. We have to look at how sophisticated this is. So moving on to the point in hand, if I can. So we're just going to look at some of the services we've come across in the last few years, which kind of reflect this agenda. The first one we talked about a number of times, which is the idea of a service which is accessible and is local. And in this community, Trieste, which is probably about the same size as Swindon, is it, give or take?
I think so, yeah.
270,000.
Around about the same size. And they don't have a large acute service. They've got 6 beds for the whole of their community. That's it, full stop. Because what happens is in the accident and emergency, what they do is somebody goes in there, within 24 hours they're out into a community mental health centre. So this for instance, this community would be part of part of Swindon, which have its own community mental health centre, which is open 24/7, and they have 6 beds. So they've got 6 units across the city. Each of them have got 6 beds. But if you go in there with an acute crisis need, you go straight from the accident emergency into the community mental health team within 24 hours. You're there, but you're there in a creative, positive space where you're only one or maybe 6 people amongst 30, 50, 60, 70, 80 people. So you don't get this kind of like situation you get on acute wards where everybody's right down. How can an acute ward be therapeutic? I mean, Robin Murray from the Schizophrenia Commission, they really went for acute wards, especially in the city areas, but most of them are terrible, toxic places. You don't get better in a place like that. Why would you? You know, everybody's in terrible space and shape. So the idea of creating accessible services, and particularly, I can't remember her name, but the mum, Sonia, who was a community rep and things like that. I mean, she was saying that if she could just have somewhere where she could go quickly and get this, and that kept on coming up. So it can be done. It might be a dream and a vision, but there's no reason why we can't do it if we can persuade the Mr. Tully, who was here earlier, that it's worthwhile trying it out. The next thing we did, and this is, you know, very, very different situation. This is in a place called Baru Johor, which is right next to Singapore, and it's the second city of Malaysia. And they've got a large psychiatric hospital, but they've got a great director of the hospital who basically doesn't use it. They've got a brand new hospital, it's empty. Or at least in terms of all the, I mean, they've got a population of patients, but all of it's geared towards trying to get people out. But one of the key things they did, they employed all these occupational therapists, and he basically said, what are we doing here? Teaching people how to work. Why don't we just get them work? So he's cut out the middle person, in effect, and the occupational therapists all became employment getters. So they developed a whole series of relationships with local employers to get people who wouldn't have got work, because for them, self-esteem, and particularly in Malaysian culture, well, I think everywhere, is rested on the fact that you're contributing to the community and are getting some income for it, even if at the beginning that's not a sizable income. So getting people back into work and finding creative ways in which you can do that. So rather than having, again, complicated occupational therapy and all this kind of thing, and you know, all this kind of thing, just set up an employment service, cut through the red tape, and they just got people work. So they're working with employers, working with people, setting up their own social firms, got a bakery, cafe. They provide all the food for the. So there's this hospital has got one use. It looks like a university campus to me. It's very similar to that. So they have they've got a big conference hall and things like that. So they provide all the food, drink. It's provided by the social cooperatives, which are organised around the patients' groups. They also clean the housing. So you know, you can create. And even though this is kind of a hospital-based service, there's no reason why a community can't do that from another perspective, from another route.
And they've developed that again, haven't they, into community services, and they're doing community centres now. But also, the occupational therapists and the staff within there, they work alongside people. It was they're employed as well until they're ready to be to manage that independently. It's a really good service.
The Friends for Mental Health in Gaza, I mean, are very, very impressive. You can probably appreciate working under extremely difficult circumstances, but where they've actually worked out a way of working in partnership with peers, so they don't leave anybody behind. So people who are distressed can come here, but they're not, but it belongs to them. And I think this idea of the Horizon Centre, the idea that we don't distinguish between, we know we want to keep our community well. But if you're extremely distressed, you're not going to be told, oh, you have to go to that service because you're not right for us, you know, we don't deal with that. So this sense of being willing and flexible and really seeing that actually we can hack this, we can deal with this, we can support people in this situation. The open dialogue, you know something about this, Kath, don't you? I think you've talked about this.
A bit, yes. Was that? Was there a presentation?
Yeah, there's a woman, we know a woman called Mia, and Mia's
oh yes, that's that next to it.
She's trained. Well, there's a community in Western Lapland, which has got 15 million reindeers and 3 people. But anyway, and they eat reindeer meat. And she's a great person. But basically, what they've done is that they locate, they deal with young people No, they actually now they deal with everybody. It is the service for everybody. But essentially, a completely different way of working. So when somebody has a psychotic episode or any serious mental health problem, they don't work with the individual. They work with their social network, their family and significant others. And the first thing they have a series of meetings. So what they work in pairs. And this is the service. There is no other service. That's what they do when they're. So anybody who has a so what they're doing is they locate. They say if schizophrenia is anything, it's a message which needs to be understood and its meaning decoded, which is held by the social network. So rather than saying, oh, that person is the problem, it actually understands the issue to be something that is arising out of what is going on, and the social network knows what that is. So the role of the two workers is to facilitate discussions over time and space so people can get their stories out and the many truths can be told and they can then negotiate the issue. What they found is the amazing thing is the outcomes. They are really effective in getting people out of the psychiatric system and back into work and back into college and to wherever they want to be. So it's really effective, and it's now being introduced into the UK because particularly in the south, and this would include probably Swindon, increasingly they're looking at open dialogue as a way of working in the UK, and particularly in England. And there's been some significant conferences run by the NHS trusts in London, particularly North East London, I think they did one, about open dialogue as a system and looking at ways of introducing these principles and philosophies into our way of work. That we don't just work with the individual, but we work with the whole family network. Or if they haven't got a family, the significant social network that's important to them. Very, very, very clever.
Am I right in thinking there was rapid access?
Oh yes.
As soon as somebody phoned, somebody answered the phone immediately and arranged to go and
And it's your responsibility, that's the thing. If you pick the phone up, I just can imagine everyone's going, I'm not picking it up. But they have to pick the phone up, and you then have to follow that through and see it through until it's resolved and the meeting's set up. So they take this sense of personal responsibility for picking up the phone and making sure it's very important, actually. That very much, and it's all based on relationships. You know, it's all based on relationships. I like this one, recovery learning communities, because it sounds a bit like Horizon. Maybe the language is very American. If you go to YouTube and look at just put recovery learning community Massachusetts in there. There's a lovely video they've made which explains what they do. But what they say is, there's all this thing being about service user-led services, and that usually creates a bit of a ghetto of service users, and we're all in the system. And then you've got this new terminology which is peers. So you all have to be, so you can't work in mental health services as a psychologist unless you're a peer. But they kind of got around that one very carefully, which is to do what we've done, which is actually say, we're all a whisker away from going through these journeys ourselves, or have been in the past anyway. So let's all be together. And they've created this sense of a membership network, and they call it deliberately communities, not centre, because it's a network which has hubs, has physical places, where they respect, but they focus much more on trauma and distress, and then they try to change the language about the way they work with others. But the interesting thing was they did this without funding. They created it, but now they get funding through personalised budgets because people are choosing to use them, and the money, the feet went there, the money followed them. So personalised budgets could be an interesting way of funding a Horizon project like this. Because I think that, I don't know, is it happening in Swindon? Personalised budgets?
very, very, very slowly.
Yeah, I spoke to somebody earlier on about it.
Did you speak to
3 people.
It's, I
in Swindon,
don't know what would you say?
from social
Not
services.
much.
Anyway,
Reluctance.
yeah, no, but I think it's very limited because they tend to exclude a whole group of people and that kind of thing. But I think we need to challenge them. And also the thing is, what they did is they just did it. They just went and did it, and they showed it working. It was attractive, and as a consequence, the funders then started coming to them to look at it, and then thought, this is really interesting. And then they got into a dialogue, and they said, no, this is what we do if you want to fund it. And they found the methodology. There was the personalised budgets. Was the way to do it. Haven is a wonderful project in Scotland, and it's Hearing Voices Network. But this is run by people who hear voices, and but it's based in the community, and it's a fantastic place. But just looking at the way it is, it's a bit like the recovery learning community, and it's got a creative space with drums and guitars and music. It's got a massage area. But the place where everybody comes in, when you come in, there's no workers area. You come in and everybody's expected to be a worker. And I love that sense, because I've been to so many day centres where the workers all squirreled away upstairs and it's like a no-go area and you can't walk in there because it's like their zone. And we've seen that it's very positive. In a project we work with in Denmark have the same concept, where they've literally moved all spaces where workers could hide. So they have to have maximum contact. They do some maximised contact with the people they work with. So they don't even have chairs, they have stand-up desks. And all they've done is created sound booths. So people need to be doing something private, like a phone call, it's a sound booth. But there is no space for the workers to go to. And they stopped having supervision sessions. They don't do supervision sessions, and they don't do handovers. Because they don't need to, because everybody's got a nexus of support with an individual person they work with, because this is the organisation that's introduced the choice idea. So again, the idea of we're all in this together, we can be very creative and supportive, and that anybody, and this is the last one, the recovery houses in Italy, where anybody, even in extreme situations, have been maintained within services for years and years and years, can come back with the support of their families. And this is a lovely project in the sense of acknowledging that working alongside family members and people who've been in services a long time, you can bring them back. And there's going to be people in this community who are in that situation as well. So, very, very fast. But if people want more, we've got loads of literature on this.
The micro community.
Yeah.
Because that's...
Yeah, that makes sense, yeah.
There's also
How long have we got?
a really good...
Well, we're sort of running a bit late. We were due to finish this at 3:40. We're due to finish
Okay.
this.
Let's see if I can find the...
But this is only just a few. There are lots of others, and in the UK.
I mean, what you can find is on our website, on the International Mental Health Campaign website, which is being redone, but next week it'll be live. You can find all sorts of resources.
Okay. I'm sorry, this is only, we put this together. In Trieste, they have, can you read that? It's a bit small. The slide's so small. But they've developed something they call micro areas. And this reminds me of what they're talking about. And the reason why they did that, they wanted to look at a particular community and to verify the state of the health of residents within a specifically limited area like Trieste, like this place, and the practice of all the health operators in the area, beginning with the GPs, which we did with ours. And which is guaranteeing the right of access to service and the right to health, evaluating the appropriateness responses and identifying what they call waste. This is written by an Italian, so excuse the odd. So what they're doing is evaluating the risk of abandonment and medicalisation, which transforms every human condition to an illness, and determining the level of full response by all actors within a given area, from the healthcare operator to the needy citizen and his neighbour. Okay, it's a bit weird, the language, but you get that. Yeah, I mean, what they're trying to say there is that, you sometimes in the services you get a choice. You either accept the rules and become medicalised, or you don't. You turn up drunk and you'll be abandoned by the service. You either buy into it or you don't, and that can be really problematic. So they want to just, let's just go into a community and let's do a state of the nation kind of examination. Let's really think about it in a bit the way we did with resources. They're also looking at the needs and the issues, and not confined to mental health, but right across. Because these things correlate and they join up.
This is all about health and well-being.
So
the bullet points.
So you start from the grassroots, like we are doing. You start with local citizens. You seek to enhance social well-being, so you've got a clear goal, a clear aim, and that you. So they're working. They focused on so-called blighted urban areas. Yeah. But the idea that they wanted to really begin to revive and animate, and they use the word animation a lot on the continent. The main reference is but also they have to involve Mr. Tully and his colleagues and the commissioners and the rest of it. But you need to tie in all the stakeholders into that, as you are trying to do here. So it's about examining the needs of the community, and I think that's to me something which you're on the path of doing. So why do this? You want to know as much as possible before you start making assumptions about what needs to be the solution, because sometimes we jump to the solution before really understanding what's going on. We want to make sure that as much as possible, things happen within your own community, within your own home. I mean, this is a big feature of the triage service, is they're really into providing a service to people in their own homes wherever possible. You don't have to go anywhere, we come to you. For them this is a big agenda. Not only because it's expensive, but it doesn't seem to always work. I mean, I think somebody picked up on it. You were saying about the role of medicine in the Western world. You know, yeah, in Gaza, you can get hold of antipsychotics for a month, that's it. No more. They ain't got no more money for any more than that. So you either have to find a solution to what's going on in your life, or you don't. Whereas, and then of course the pharmacy companies will see that as a problem of distribution. But maybe it's actually part of the solution, that people only get short-term use when they need it. But it's an interesting point.
There's a very, very good book, Anatomy of an Epidemic, that charts
Yeah.
the use of antipsychotic medication and the difference between those that get it and those that don't, and also comparing with the third world.
Is that
And
Robert
there's
Whittaker?
similar recovery rates for those who get off the medication in the Western world with those in the third world.
Yeah. Which is why we open dialogue. People aren't taking medication, they get better, they just get better. That's it.
Yeah.
Back. You know. Whereas you live with a lifelong illness, which isn't so easy. So you know, you can see that the principle of collaboration. You know, we want more kind of supportive therapeutic services, more groups, more coordination. It all fits the kind of agenda that we've got. So we brought that to your attention because I think it also shows that, you know, other places across the world. Wow, that was clever. Over to you.
I mean, the other thing about this is that they've focused on populations of 1,000 people,
Oh, that's interesting.
and the different agencies have come together and put together a resource to do this program. So it's like a shared. So the budget is actually shared, and therefore each organisation is not very much. So it's possible to do it.
Yes, that is really interesting, and once we get workers' meetings going, I think it will be interesting to see what the workers come up with. I mean, one of the things we're talking about is shared training, you know, about people, you know, and that costs nothing virtually, you know, if people are willing to share their expertise around the table with other people who perhaps don't have much knowledge around it. Thanks for that. Does anybody want to ask any questions about that before we move on, about what they've heard about some of the other models?
Just one quick question, actually. The Italian recovery situation, is that a similar model to the Massachusetts one, or is it only accidental that recovery has been used in the title for both?
Yeah, I think the Massachusetts, they talk about clinical recovery, social recovery, and I think that they talk about holistic recovery. You can't tease out, because in the Massachusetts model, it's kind of inevitably it's been clinicised to a certain extent, and they've kind of like taken it apart. And you know, you can be clinically recovered from your schizophrenia if you comply with your treatment. That's not quite the same thing as saying I've just got my life back and I'm not schizophrenic anymore. They wouldn't. Massachusetts would find that difficult to cope with, I think, as a concept. But it's probably more familiar. It's more like the Ellen Copeland model of it, the wellness recovery action plan idea, which is also about coping strategies and self-management, and also is also similar to the way that I work, which is it's a human experience. A lot of people have it. The fact you're overwhelmed by it is something we can deal with. But let's have a look at its meaning. So you're curious about what is going on with this experience, and you want to know, you know, is a voice here now? Does he know I'm here, or she? You know, and then can I talk to the voice? You know, so you come up with a different perspective on it rather than seeing it as part of a symptomology that leads you to a diagnosis. You stay with it. You hear voices. It's only Joan of Arc. Yeah, she was surprised too, and it didn't go well. Well, it did for a while. She had the good times, you had the bad times. Yeah, but you know, and I think this curiosity, and this, you know, in a sense, almost playfulness as well, and actually been acknowledging that, you know, this is something you can definitely deal with.
Anyone else want to?